welcome back. Remember, this is the Economy Trend Pointer, and our topic today is disaster management. Gentlemen, in 2009, the nation policy of disaster management was formulated and adopted, and the policy proposes that privately owned equipment should be used in order to help in disaster management. Do you think this is what happened?
When we talk about privately owned things coming to be used when there is a disaster, then we are quoting a disaster. Because one, people are finding avenues to it. Because some of these things you may find, yes, they are being used, but the cost that is going to be, the bill that is going to be given to the government will be exorbitant. For me, the policy, it's not bad, but that policy should be devolved to the counties. And the disaster equipment should now be owned by the county governments because they are closer to the people. It is only when the the county government has exhaustively used what it has, that it can now call upon the private equipment to come in and assist them. But first of all, county governments must be equipped to be able to contain any disaster that comes. You know, it is like you are having a problem in the house and you are saying, I want somebody to come and solve it for me when you are not doing anything. Yeah. That person can even decide to take up 1 or 2 days to come when you are dying. So first of all, do something for yourself and then ask somebody else to do it. Privately owned equipment can be deployed elsewhere when you need them. But when the county government has those equipment, they are there anytime they can be used. For example, I was not happy when Garissa issue happened. You know, they don't have any, people must come all the way from Nairobi with the equipment to go and fight terrorism in Garissa. By the time they are arriving there, many people have lost their lives. But you can imagine if Garissa county government had that kind of expertise, immediately that thing happened, I'm sure they would have minimized the amount of lives we lost. So as much as I would like the private-owned equipment to be of last resort, but the county government must be empowered to have those equipments so that they can immediately respond to any disaster that comes.
Thank you. I think what Dr. Aria said is true. I must say that the policy which we have is there, and what needs to be done, I can say more needs to be done. As according to the policy of 2009, the policy is good, but more needs to be done. Now, considering the engagement with the private sector, you know, the private sector seems to be very active. That is why the government is simply saying, like, moving out to engage the private sector. So, in the event there's disaster, I really want to differ slightly that if the private sector is actually involved or given that mandate, then these disasters can be, somebody can say, if you call a private-owned person, he can be able to act faster than the government. That is the way I see it. But they need more in terms of maybe MOUs to agree on what is to be done at what time and all that, so that the privately owned equipment can be utilized in the disaster management, because it will be faster and it will also react immediately there is a disaster. Assuming you take a government institution, I'm not saying we are bad in the terms of government, but assuming a privately owned and the public, you will find that even if it devolved in the county, you will find that they might be slower than even anything else. They might be saying there is no fuel to buy this because of the procedures and all that. But if it was the privately owned, you will find that there is more reaction. So, to me, something more needs to be done in the sense that what agreement needs to be entered by the government and the private sector or the privately owned people. Thank you.
Yeah, as much as private sector, they are effective, but there are things that we can give private sector to do, and there are things that the government must do. For example, when we have terrorists coming, it will be difficult for us to say, let us have a private military to intervene. So as much as we are saying the private sector may be swift, but there are other avenues where the government must just be in control. Because at the end of it, for example, when you are talking about terrorism, maybe about drought, I don't know how the private sector can come in immediately when we have drought or rains, but maybe in that area they may, by, for example, bringing ideas on how to change, like in Tana River. We have what, Galana something they call it, Galana irrigation scheme. That's why now the private sector is being told, please you come and assist us to develop this area, because the government tried it and they were telling us we are going to have how many millions of shillings from their bags of maize, but it fell short. Now that's why they are now telling the Israeli companies to come, the private sector to come and boost it. That's why I agree. But when it comes to some hot stuff, disaster, like things to do with the terrorists, things to do with the fire and so on, it may be a little bit tricky to just source all those things from outside. After all, we may not hold those private companies accountable. At the end of the day, we are going to hold the government and the people we elected accountable when there is a disaster. I think that one is the most important thing.
Yeah. What needs to be done is really be cautious on what to give the private, but the private must be given something. So you'll find that there are some delegations which must be done, but with cautiousness that the government is also in charge. So you'll find that, for example, the irrigation, if you find Kudalang is a problem with the government, which is coming in, year out, and another year, another 5 years, whatever, give it to the private, you'll see. You'll have a very good dam which can be utilized for some irrigation, and you'll find more production, and will not be able to be crying in and out. Here come in, we cry, and we keep on crying. So what is there is, after delegation, follow-up must be done, that government is the one in charge.
Gentlemen, setting aside money for curing the disaster has always led to misuse of funds, which has brought a negative impact to the economy. There are also ways on which we can prevent instead of curing these disasters. You can say something about this?
I think there is always a problem when we don't plan for these things. You know, sometimes when you are abroad, for example, Mzungu plans for his funeral until he is buried. He even pays for it, you know, because he doesn't want to leave disaster when he is dead, people start looking for money. The African context is like we don't believe there will be a disaster. And therefore, when it comes, we have not planned for anything. And therefore, we start looking for money. And when you have money, you just start running up and down. And then you end up just misusing that money. Therefore, to me, the most important thing, to economically use that money, we must have a plan in place. We must have people who have trained. We must have, for example, when it is raining, for example, in Narok, the problem is drainage. For now, before it comes to rain, if we have drainage in place, there will be no need of many people running up and down for mitigation. Things will just happen. The only problem that money end up being misused is because immediately when it starts raining, people are panicking, they are running up and down, they want equipment, the prices are exorbitantly put up because you are desperately in need of them, and somebody there gets his cut and so on and so forth. Planning, planning, planning. And then implementation aspect will follow the planning. And the planning is about what activity to be done and how much is supposed to be used. That's it. The problem is we don't plan. And if we plan, we haphazardly implement because we don't have trained people to do that.
Thank you. I think Dr. said we need to like planning and all that, and the planning which he has said is there. I must say that any disaster, we don't know the disaster, but we only budget for a certain just disaster, because there could be a disaster cannot be something we know. If we are to plan, we plan for what we don't know, or we budget for what we don't know. That is true. But if you look at the way the disaster comes in, you can have an earthquake, but you are not planned for the earthquake. So what we are simply saying is just simply set aside some money to be used for any cause of a disaster. And if you look at the misuse of these resources, misuse always have so much effects in any economy. For one, if we don't plan so that we have the people who are actually affected, the wananchis, like the one we had in Garissa, there is so much of a spillover effects. You could be able to have some families being wiped out, for example, or not even wiped out. Is it will have an impact of production, our output will be low, and consequently at the finality, our national income will be very low. In this sense, if a family has been affected, he cannot be able to produce. If he is not able to produce, he cannot be able to feed the family. If he is not able to feed the family, he is not contributing anything to the national cake. So what you are saying, that Mwananchi can be affected and cannot be able to contribute substantially as supposed to have done if he was actually not affected by the disaster.
Gentlemen, in less than 5 seconds, give your final words.
To manage disasters, we need to learn from what has been happening previously. History is very important. We need to know and learn from what happens last year and so on, when the drought was there and when we had problem of earthquake and so on. So planning must be pegged on what has been happening. Thank you.
Thank you. I think as a last comment, I must say that disaster can always occur. Number two, we need to be always prepared and get ready for anything so that we can be able to overcome that disaster. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping it KTS. Remember, this has been the Economy Trend Pointer. Our topic has been disaster management. I've been your host, Immaculate Burunja. Until next time, see you.